How did America win the hearts and minds of Nazi Germany's most hardened soldiers? Not with bullets, but with breakfast. This is the incredible story of how pancakes, ice cream, and Coca-Cola dismantled an ideology. Imagine being a German soldier, a veteran of the elite Afrika Korps. Captured in 1943, you've been fed Nazi propaganda your whole life. America is a weak, chaotic, mongrel nation on the brink of collapse. You brace yourself for starvation, for the brutal treatment you've been told to expect. Instead, upon arrival in the United States, you're handed a ration. The processing camp serves you fresh eggs, milk, and pancakes. One captured German officer later testified, "The Americans fed us better than our own army had." This was the first crack in the foundation of their worldview. The real ideological bombshell wasn't a weapon. It was a 5-cent bottle of Coca-Cola. In 1943 alone, the company pumped out 5 billion bottles. For German prisoners, this wasn't just a drink. It was a symbol of something they couldn't comprehend: industrial democracy. The fact that a simple, standardized, high-quality pleasure was available to everyone. Everywhere, from a general to a private, shattered the Nazi myth of American disorganization. It was a liquid lesson in mass production and distribution that their own totalitarian system couldn't match. In wartime Germany, ice cream was a forgotten luxury, a ghost of peacetime. The ingredients cream, sugar, ice were impossibly scarce. Yet in American POW camps it was served regularly, was even churned on transport ships crossing the Atlantic. The U.S. military literally classified ice cream as essential for morale. To the German prisoners, this casual use of precious resources for a simple dessert was mind-boggling. It demonstrated a level of abundance and a priority on individual well-being that was completely alien to their experience of total war and the sugar. On every mess hall table, there were bowls of it, free for the taking. Back home, their families were lucky to get 280 grams a month. Here, prisoners could have 4 pounds a month if they wanted. Think about that. The symbol of wartime scarcity in Europe was a condiment in America. Chocolate was the same story. While German children dreamed of a single piece, Hershey and Mars were churning out millions of bars for the war effort. The U.S. military alone bought 380 million pounds of chocolate. This wasn't just food. It was a psychological weapon of unimaginable power. Let's look at the hard numbers because they are staggering. Between 1943 and 1946, a German prisoner in an American camp consumed between 3,300 and 3,600 calories a day. The propaganda about the brutal, subhuman American enemy dissolved completely during the holidays. Imagine the shock of being served a traditional Thanksgiving dinner, roast turkey, stuffing, pumpkin pie, or receiving Christmas packages filled with cookies and candy, not from the government, but from local American church groups and civic organizations. This wasn't state-mandated generosity. It was the spontaneous kindness of the very people they'd been taught to hate. It forced a fundamental reevaluation of who the enemy really was. This wasn't just happening inside the camps. About 100,000 prisoners were put to work on farms and in factories. There they witnessed the engine of American abundance firsthand. They saw massive orchards where 15% of perfectly good fruit was discarded for minor blemishes. They saw the scale of food processing, the efficiency of the supply chains. They even saw the beginnings of school lunch programs, where the government made sure children had milk and food. It was a society built not on scarcity and conquest, but on production and plenty. The most surreal chapter of this story is the role reversal it created. Using the small wages they earned from their labor, German POWs began buying American goods from the camp canteens. They bought chocolate, instant coffee, and canned hams. But they weren't buying them for themselves. They were packing them up and mailing them home to their starving families in Germany. Over the course of the war, these prisoners sent an estimated 11 million food parcels back to the Reich. The conquerors had become dependents, being fed by their inferior captors. This experience triggered a profound ideological transformation. The core of Nazi belief was that strength came from conquest, from taking land and resources from others. What the prisoners learned in America was that true power came from production, came from creating wealth, not just seizing it. It was the realization that a free, consumer-driven society could outproduce and outlast a top-down authoritarian regime. This wasn't a lecture they were given. It was a conclusion they reached over 3 square meals a day. This transformation didn't end when the war was over. When these 380,000 men returned to a shattered Germany, they didn't bring back bitterness. They brought back a blueprint. They had seen a different way of life, and they became its most fervent advocates. They championed the Marshall Plan, not as a handout, but as a wise investment in productivity they had already witnessed. These former POAs became the architects of West Germany's Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of the 1950s. They applied the lessons of American mass production, standardization, and consumer culture. They pushed for the introduction of American-style supermarkets. They understood that industrial democracy, with its focus on the consumer, is more powerful and resilient than any dictatorship. They learned that the surest way to defeat an ideology of hate and scarcity is to overwhelm it with kindness and abundance. The war for Germany's future was won, in no small part, in the mess halls of America. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the hidden corners of history. See you next time.